Let me tell you what a good preacher will do. A good preacher, there are just a few things. They will never point you to themselves. If people start saying to you, you must give to our ministry so that we can survive, and you're nothing to do it. I know of one, sadly American-based, but it's not just Americans, but I know of one ministry who sent out letters, a secret letter contained in their overall newsletter with a message I've never given you before, and it was this: you must tithe to my ministry and not to your local church. Let me tell you something, a good preacher will always point you to a local church. I don't want to hear anything else. God doesn't have a plan B. Bill Hybels says the greatest hope for any town is the local church. A preacher will point us to Christ. Will point to Christ. And while I'm just mentioning tithing, if you think that we're being spiritual by splitting the tithe and giving 5% here, because I've experienced this in my church life as a pastor, 5% here, 3% there, and 2% to the church because they don't really need it, you're breaking the covenant of God over your life, and it's nothing to do with the law. The tithe came about by Abraham. It was pre-law, and Jesus never overturned it. In fact, he affirmed it, said to the Pharisees, you should do that, but you need to do other things too. I've upset everyone. Not one person smiling now. If I could lovingly, I'm just talking about tithing now, I'm off that, aren't I? We might not get through Corinthians, but just to say this, if you're tired, sick and tired of churches, and maybe even this church historically, and even in the future, asking you for special offerings, if everybody in the church tithed, we would ask for less. A good preacher will take you and build you in maturity in Christ. A good preacher will be willing to be incarnational, not just on television. What do I mean by that? You're thinking, oh, he doesn't watch Christian television. I do, but I choose what I watch. I don't rely on the editors at a Christian TV channel, whoever they are, to edit what I hear, because some of them need so much cash to keep it going, they let anybody preach through the TV. So I choose what I watch. But a preacher that is solely in distance and ministry, and it's not wrong to buy books and do these things and build ourselves up in Christ. It's not wrong to do these things. But the true gospel is incarnational. A preacher needs to be incarnational. What does that mean? It means there's a physical presence. We have to be incarnational Christians. That means we meet with people who aren't saved. Who would have thunk it? But it does happen. We have to be incarnational. And it doesn't matter who's preaching on a Sunday, we have to be incarnational in your lives. And lastly, they will not ask for money to pray for you. If you're listening to this on the interweb, I apologize if I've upset you. But I have to tell you, that's the truth. Good preaching should unite us. But even in some of the things I've said in the last 3 minutes, potentially has caused a division, because some of us will hold more dearly the teaching of that we should get in our lounge than what is produced through the local church. My friends, I would want to bring you a loving correction. You may receive from there, but anything you give to them is an offering. It's an offering of time, it's an offering of support. But this is the storehouse. And if you're part of this church, I unashamedly ask you to give to this church. And I don't have to apologize biblically for that, because that's biblical. This is the storehouse. And if you're visiting here, and I'm still fairly new here, so I don't know if you're visiting, and I hope you're enjoying it so far. But if you're visiting here and you've enjoyed it and you're wanting to make this your spiritual home, you need to know that there is a commitment if you become a member here. Anyone can visit and drink from the river and the well here. We don't mind that. But if there's a commitment of membership, let me tell you something. Every member should be tithing. That said, all that said, and I wasn't going to say any of that, so I may not finish my message. I recognize that at this church we have 4 full-time paid ministry staff members. We have a myriad of people throughout the church who are volunteers, who are gifted in teaching and preaching and so on. And even out of that group, you may have your preferred favorite, the one that speaks to you the most, that just communicates in a language that you get and understand. That's allowable. What's not allowable is staying away when it's not your favorite preacher preaching, because that shows immaturity. It's not allowed to stay away when the children are coming in, and I'm preaching to the choir as such because you're here, but when the children are on a Sunday and we know they're going to be at the front, if it's your preference to stay away when they're coming to the front, that's not allowed, because we're one body. Do we understand this? And there will be some of us that can go back historically in this church, and our favorites will be Pastor Derek Green and Pastor Eric Hutchinson and even Pastor Mike Sheward. They would have been our favorite pastors. And for some of you, I will not be your favorite pastor ever. Do you know what? I can live with that as long as it does not become a point of division in the church. As long as we do not say, oh, wasn't it great in the glory days when we had Pastor so-and-so, and it's never been like that before. My first Sunday in an Elim church after I got saved, the deacon stood up, and I didn't know he was talking about me in this little select group of 50 people, the chosen frozen. But there we were. And I sat on the back row, and it was like the parting of the Red Sea, because nobody knew how to talk to a visitor, because I didn't know. No one had got saved in that church for years. I didn't know that. And I sat there at the back, and he said, isn't it great to see young people in church? And I'm looking around, I see one or two. And then he said, isn't it a pity you missed the glory days? And I realized he was talking about me. I've been saved about 3 days. And I said, Lord, I did not leave what I had to miss what you've got. So I've decided to live every day in the glory of days. Can we not make our favorite preacher a divisive thing? The next thing that can divide us is our favorite habits. Oh dear, this isn't as funny, this one. He's not amusing us. Paul talks about the immorality in the church, and he cautions them, and he actually says they're worse than pagans. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1, it said it's actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and a kind that does not even occur among the pagans, for a man has his father's wife. If you want to read between the lines, he's married his mother. And then he goes on and says, and you are proud? Shouldn't you rather have been filled with grief and put out the fellowship, the man who did this? It seems the church had taken liberty to new depths. It said, oh, we're all under grace and nothing counts. There are no boundaries anymore. Now, understand this. Some things are needed in church life to make it relevant to the culture in which it lives. We have to be relevant to the town that we live, and some of that will be given in musical style, some of that will be given in style of preaching and the various activities that are on inside the church. But our message does not change. The message is that we don't expect you to be holy before you meet Christ, but when you meet him, something changes. And sometimes that changes immediately, and sometimes it changes over time. I love the testimonies of people get up, I was a drug addict, and when I became a Christian, I don't do cocaine anymore. God delivered me of it straight away. But then they go on to say, but I'm still struggling with smoking. I can live with that kind of tension because some things God delivers us of, and some things there is a work of sanctification and the gradual process in our lives of being transformed from one degree of glory to another. So I don't expect everyone who start at different points in their lives and meet Christ and come from different backgrounds. I don't expect us all to be the same. Isn't that good news? Because if you're all like me, life would be much more fun for everybody. But sadly, you're not like me, so let's let God do it his way. And so what's happening in this church is there are no boundaries. Now, Corinth has become famous for its depravity. And so what's happened is that's just continuing in the church. Got all these young Christians who are just continuing with that. But then people get upset when we start talking about boundaries and moral living, particularly when it comes to our sexual activities. Can I just say a few things about boundaries? I have boundaries on my life. When I talk with people who are cohabiting and not married, when I talk with people who are struggling with their orientation, although they wouldn't say they are, but they might be in a same-sex relationship or anything like that, I will talk, not in a condemning way, but I talk about the boundaries on my life, because the boundaries on my life are the same for everybody. And it's not because I'm a preacher, it's because I've chosen to live the way of love in the gospel. And so therefore I say to them, here are the boundaries on my life which apply to everybody, because this is what the Bible tells me. Firstly, no physical hanky-panky before I got married. Secondly, when I am married, then I'm committed to a woman. That it's not a same-sex relationship. And ideally, this marriage is a covenant for life, but it is not necessarily a covenant that cannot be broken. Jesus said that it's not an eternal covenant, in other words. My marriage to Barbie is great, but it's a temporary arrangement. When I get to heaven, I won't be married to her. Jesus tells me that. So it's temporary. I'm believing it's going to last our lifetime. We also know that under certain circumstances, marriages do break up. Jesus allowed for that as well. So we shouldn't condemn people, but love them when their marriages break up. So we understand those principles, but ideally it's for life. Someone once said to Barbie, have you ever thought of divorce? She said no, but murder often. And finally, faithfulness within that marriage is required. In other words, my boundary is I cannot follow my lusts. So I do not give themselves over to me. So what I have done is I've worked on this for years, even before I met Barbie. I really try not to look at, and I need to be careful because I don't want to embarrass anyone or upset anyone, but I try not to look at women in a lustful way. And Barbie sometimes will walk down the road. She says, look at that, isn't that a lovely woman? And I genuinely will not have noticed. Someone in this building, I won't embarrass them, but when I'm in town going from A to B and on my own, I want to get to B. I don't want to dilly-dally between A and B. You understand? I just want to get there. If I go into a shop, I get in, I get out. You know, I try and do that. But I overtook someone on the zebra crossing, and they called after me and said, Keith, aren't you going to say hello? But I genuinely just don't look at women from behind. Come on, men. Can I tell you a lie the devil says looking is okay? It's not. It's not. You ever been with a woman shopping? How many hours of your life have you wasted, gentlemen? Oh, looking doesn't cost us anything. Looking cost me an afternoon. I cannot simply live without this dress. I think you will, darling. Looking is what is basically where we give the entrance to and permission to something in our lives, and then we ponder on it, and we ponder on it so much that we go home to our wives and we start saying, I wish you were like that. We don't say that, but we think it. Men, that is depraved. That is outside of the boundary. Don't look. If you're struggling with this, Cy Rogers has done some wonderful teaching on this, but one of the things he says is he had to say a prayer, and his prayer was this: Father, thank you for putting that beautiful creation in front of me, but now I give her back to you, and I honor you. That prayer is really, really helpful. Boy, we don't want to live like Corinthians, do we?